Welcome to a Wonder Junkie podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Anderson.
Nobody knows what's going on. Nobody knows. Nobody has the faintest idea. The best guesses are lies. You may be sure of it.
Right on, Dr. Rob Williams. Thanks for joining me, brother.
Ryan, it's so good to be in flow with a Wonder Junkie.
Yeah, I appreciate you. I've been listening to your words, a couple podcasts. I dove into your website, and the way you spoke about some of the subject matter, whether it be breath, we're going to get into talking about breathing, and it's something I've explored pretty deeply myself. You speak so eloquently about that subject, so I'd love to start off with that subject, but we're going to get into some really interesting things about geoengineering, which I don't think a lot of people are very aware of at this time, which is strange. So you speak so eloquently about that as well. So I really wanted to have you on to cover some ground about those two major subjects, which we'll do. But I thought it would be fun in the beginning to have us start off with the most important thing, which is the breath. And I do believe we have the similar teachers, Patrick McKeown and Wim Hof and many others. So here we are, brother.
Yes, shout out to Patrick and to Wim and to all those teaching breathing out there. So, Ryan, it's great to be here. And maybe we can begin with a very simple exercise. We can invite those listening, watching to join us as long as you're not driving or operating heavy machinery. It's a very simple diagnostic exercise, just takes a few seconds. We're going to take 3 normal breaths together in and out through our nose. And then on the 4th breath, we'll take a nice deep inhale through the nose, filling up the lungs. Don't force it, but just as full as you can get. And then this is where it gets really fun. On my cue, we're simply going to release that single exhale from the top all the way down to the bottom as slowly as possible. And I'm actually going to keep track on what's called a watch. Keep track in seconds of the time, and I'll just call out seconds every 5 seconds. And just when you get to the very, very, very bottom of that single exhale, see if you can remember the time closest to your finish in seconds. And helpful visual metaphor, perhaps, on that exhale, if you imagine a pinprick leak in a bicycle tire. So you're at the top of the inhale, you let it go really slowly. And the most important thing here is simply to observe, how does that single exhale feel? Sound good?
Sounds great. Perfect.
And then we'll dive in. Okay, so those listening, watching, want to try this at home with Ryan, the Wonder Junkie, and Rob, the breath guy, for today, I guess. Go ahead, close your eyes if that feels good. Let's gently close our mouth, seal our lips, and let's maybe shake the hands a little bit, kind of loosen everything up. And let's meet at the bottom of our next exhale together in 3, 2, 1. Take a nice normal breath in through the nose. And good, nice normal breath out. Second normal breath in. Good, second normal breath out. Relax, third normal breath in. And third normal breath out. This one's different. Go ahead on this 4th inhale. Take a few seconds, really fill the lungs, and go ahead and release that exhale as slowly as you possibly can. Through the nose. Just allowing the air to slowly leak out of the body. We're at now 20 seconds. Imagining that pinprick leak in a bicycle tire, 25 seconds. Notice how that feels, 30 seconds. as you steer that breathing, that exhale, all the way down, 40 seconds to the very bottom. No rush, 45 seconds, 50 seconds. And when you get to the very bottom, 55 seconds, give me the high sign, 60 seconds. Beautiful. Just let your breath return to normal flow for a moment. Again, observing how that single exhale felt. Coming back into the Riverside Wonder Junkie Ryan Anderson studio. Have you ever done that before?
Yes, I have.
Nice.
Yeah.
What do you call that breathing exercise?
And I guess pranayama is something that I've been studying, then doing breath holds and trying to do as long of an exhale as you can, and then usually doing breath holds at the bottom of the exhale, doing breath holds at the top of the inhale. As far as the test goes, I forget what the name of that, if you're going to do a CO2 tolerance test.
Yeah, that particular exhale exercise from the top of the inhale to the bottom of the exhale, the scientists call that the carbon dioxide tolerance test.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, the CO2 TT.
Yeah.
There are a number of laboratory experiments going on in various universities and labs around the world right now, trying to figure out the significance of that particular very simple exercise. Now, at Nordic Flow, which is our breath training company, www.nordicflow.io, we call it simply the flow score, because that seems sexier than the carbon dioxide tolerance test.
Sure.
It's a way to measure not just the flow of the exhale in the moment, but also give you a little bit of insight into how you are being in the moment, mind, body, spirits. So what did you notice, Ryan, simply observing that long, slow exhale? How did that feel?
The last 20 seconds, even though I practiced breath work for years, you start to feel that, not air hunger, but a little bit of the fight or flight kicking in, not in a super intense way or anything, but you can feel that desire to breathe because the CO2 is what drives the breath. So I can feel it kick in, and I'm like, okay, I'm aware of that. I've felt that before, but I could feel that air hunger kicking in just a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're clearly an oxygen advantage trained human. Talking about air hunger, that's very Patrick. I love it. Yeah. Were you able to, in those last 20 seconds, just kind of, it sounds like you were, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you're kind of able to just acknowledge without giving in to the anxiety or fear or whatever one might call it?
Yeah, definitely. And for people that, like you're probably going to get into, is like a way to help people with that is to at least give them a preemptive understanding that that's going to happen, because a lot of people have never experienced that or tried something like a breath hold to that degree, or so they get the panic. But if you're aware, almost like getting in the ice, that you're going to feel all these sensations, I feel like people might be more willing to just acknowledge it instead of take the panic breath or jump into feeling, like leaning into that feeling too quickly.
Yeah, beautifully said. So there's a couple of powerful elements to the flow score, to the carbon dioxide tolerance test or the measurement that we just did. And you kind of put your finger on one. The flow score gives you an in this moment measurement of how you are showing up in this moment. And typically you're out there in Arizona, so it's fairly early in the morning for you, right? 8:15, is that right?
7:15.
Oh, Arizona, right? Because Arizona has
until November.
has its own time.
Yeah.
So weird. I never know what time it is, whenever it is.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's funny. Early in the morning for the flow score, typically if you've had a reasonably good night's sleep, any human will probably have a higher number of seconds, a more optimal, let's say, flow score in the morning than in the evening after you've been through the stresses, the trials, the tribulations, the excitement of the day. The second powerful thing about the flow score is it touches on on three arenas of the breath that many of us who inhabit this space are familiar with. The first would be breathing biochemistry, what we at Nordic Flow call breath. We call this breath flow. We have the ability as humans to optimize the mix of respiratory gases moving in and out of our bodies when we consciously and strategically train the breath, which is amazing, right? Lots of nitrogen moving in and out, obviously oxygen, which we think of as our body's most important respiratory gas, but you know this from your work with Patrick. Shout out to Patrick. I've studied with him too. He's amazing. Patrick McCohen, Oxygen Advantage. Carbon dioxide in many ways is our body's most important respiratory gas. And what we're measuring here is our body's ability simply to discard, to let go of carbon dioxide on this single exhale. So touching on breath biochemistry, number one. Number two, what we call breath mind, or the psychology of breathing. How is our mind involved or not involved in our breathing? And you know this from your own journey, I'm sure. The mind is a much more powerful navigator of our breathing than we might think. So when you touched on that last 20 seconds, right, that was your mind simply maybe showing up and could potentially worry a little bit about what's going on there, but you've probably trained yourself just to relax into that. So breath flow, biochemistry, breath mind, the psychology of breathing, and last for the moment, what we call the biomechanics, or I prefer the word biosomatics of breathing, how our body and breath are in conversation. So we call this breath body in Nordic Flow. Breath flow, breath mind, breath body. The biomechanics of our breathing, or the biosomatics. 11 pounds of respiratory muscles in the average human body. The most important of which, as I think we all know, is the diaphragm, right? So we can train all three of these arenas. We can train our 11 pounds of breathing muscles, our 60,000 miles of circulatory tubing, our 1,500 miles of respiratory tubing. With breath body exercises, we can train the mind and the breath. This is what meditation is, in many traditions is about in part. And we can also train our bodies to optimize breathing biochemistry, that mix of gases. Patrick talks about this. James Nestor, in his fairly well-known book, Breath, The New Science of a Lost Art, talks about these chemoreceptors at the base of the brainstem down to the lower third of our lung lobes. These chemoreceptors that are constantly monitoring the relative alkalinity of our body and using breathing to regulate that. It's quite something. And those chemoreceptors can be retrained over 3 to 6 weeks, let's say, of regular daily flow to be as good, or certainly as better perhaps than they were for most people who are maybe not breathing as well as they could be. So breath flow, breath mind, breath body, and that single exhale, Ryan, gives us this really remarkable little insight into how we're showing up in the moment. So we have at Nordic Flow an app, and our app begins when you create an account and come into the app. It begins with measuring your flow score. And based on the seconds of your flow score, it recommends particular breathing exercises for you to begin to immediately get your arms around your breathing, how you might make your breathing better. So you came in just over 60 seconds, which is beautiful. Ideally, we like to see, with a flow score, we like to see 60 seconds or above, which indicates pretty optimal pulmonary function. 30 to 60 seconds, like you're in pretty good shape in the moment. So maybe some good work to do. Under 30 seconds, where most of us tend to be, you've got some work to do, or some play to do,
Yeah.
as I like to say. And maybe this would be a good moment to sort of put a pin in the word or the phrase breath work. I don't love that phrase. It's used all the time, of course. I use it myself. But breath work really makes it sound so difficult. It's so Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism. It's so Max Weber, right? It's like, oh, we're going to do breath work. It's like we get 20,000 opportunities to breathe every day. Most of those breaths ought to be playful. In fact, most of those breaths we shouldn't really even notice because it's just humming away so beautifully in the background. Like we've trained to optimize our breathing. So unless we're engaged in vigorous physical exercise or meditation or an active conscious strategic breath patterning flow, most of our breaths should be playful rather than work, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I love how you use breath play. I heard you say that before. And how did you get into developing Nordic Flow and get into breath work? And how did you end up developing this program? Was it just taking all the best parts that you've learned and figuring out the most practical way to give it to people?
Yeah, so I've been an athlete all my life, Ryan, and no one ever explained to me the importance of breathing. As a runner, as a trekker, as a swimmer, never got that. And when I turned 50-ish, I would say, and we kind of went through the period I refer to affectionately as the COVID-topian time, I took on the project of immersing myself in breath training practices. And it began with Wim Hof. Shout out to the Iceman. And I met a woman at Wim Hof Academy in the Rocky Mountains, Estes Park, the winter of 2021, who became my business partner. She was the only woman in 20 instructors in this cohort, the only cohort to get certified in the Wim Hof method over that 3-year period of the COVID time, because the Hoffers at the Hoffice in the Netherlands at Inner Fire shut everything down like everybody else did, and weren't really doing any face-to-face instruction. And 20 of us in North America petitioned the Hoffice and said, look, we'll sign whatever papers you want, but send us your 3 best instructors because we want to finish our training, because let's get on with it. And to their credit, they did. And so Lindsay Truby and I met in the Wim Hof Academy training. The 3rd day of our training in the Rockies, she said, look, Rob, I have this idea for a breath training ecosystem. I said, oh, tell me more. And one thing led to another. I gave her 20 hours of pro bono consulting time to help her flesh out this idea for a comprehensive 24/7 conscious strategic breathing ecosystem. And she called me one day and she said, how about you just be my business partner? I'm like, how about that? Let's do that. So we founded Peak Flow, ran that for 3 years as a startup, and then we were acquired just over a year ago by a cold plunge company in Charleston, South Carolina, called Nordic Wave. And we changed our name to Nordic Flow. So Nordic Flow is now our breath training company on the West Coast, and Nordic Wave is our cold plunge company on the East Coast. And we're running these 2 sister companies in parallel.
Love it.
And just between you and me and your podcast audience, maybe we'll create one company.
That's great.
Some point of the 2, but we have yet to determine that. So Lindsay really convinced me of the power of this notion of a comprehensive approach to breathing that is really, she calls it a 24/7 lifestyle approach, which I like. The metaphor I use, Ryan, is arrows in the quiver, right? So if you imagine each of us is flowing through life with a quiver of breath work or breath play arrows on our back. And what we do at Nordic Flow is train humans to know which arrow to pull out of the quiver for the occasion, right? So you're a firefighter. You're running into a hot burning building. It's like, oh, I got a couple of arrows that I'm going to pull out and breathe my way through this crazy adventure I'm about to have. And that's no joke. You know better than me. Or, oh, I'm going into a hard conversation with a friend or a loved one. Oh, okay, let me get that arrow. Oh, I'm training for a marathon. Here's the arrows for that. Or I'm having trouble sleeping. Oh, let's grab that arrow. So that's the metaphor I use, quivers in the arrow. And at Nordic Flow, we have sort of a 6-arena approach to the ecosystem. And to your observation of a moment ago, yes, we've studied with Wim Hof, we've studied with Patrick McKeown, we've studied with the Buteyko method crew, and Patrick, of course, as you know, is affiliated and really helped revive Konstantin Buteyko's work, thankfully, because I think it's in some ways maybe the most important of them all. And Lindsay comes out of a yogic background, mindfulness background. Both of us come out of an athletic training background. And so we really immersed ourselves for 3 years in all of the science, all of the mystery, and built Nordic Flow through our collaborative work together with a lot of other humans and they all know who they are if they're listening or watching. And it's been a real powerful journey for us, I would say. And I fully appreciate, Ryan, how much you are immersed in breath training yourself. So that's cool to hear. Well, yeah. How did you what was your journey?
Similar to yours. I hurt my back. I'm 44. So when I was 29, I think I injured my back and I was told I needed surgery and all that stuff. So I found it through going against what I was told. And it was a good wake up call to some of the issues in the centralized medical model. And I didn't want to get surgery and I didn't want to just inject myself with pain meds and all that. So I chose a different route and I started to find yoga, float tanks, plant medicines, all these different things. And when I was in those float tanks is when I started to, for the first time, really even realize I was breathing because it was so quiet in there. And that's all you could hear was your breath.
Wow.
And so it sort of broke me into the relationship to the breath situation. And I started to explore that intuitively. A lot of the things I did was I discovered, I went into plant medicines and all these things without reading about it first, which I don't recommend now. I'm like, man, I had to reverse engineer and go and discover what is all this and who are the people that knew a lot more about it before. So then I started to explore breath work and find different, more yogic teachers and yogic styles through pranayama. And then I found Wim Hof, of course, and went through his program, 10-week program at the time. And then I started to get into the superventilatory breathing on a daily basis, which then led me to realize I found Patrick's work and Buteyko method and realized how much that piece is missing. Because in the West, I think what we do is we like to hit the gas pedal and find momentum and feel and ramp things up. And you see a lot of that in the breathwork community. So I started finding workshops. I went to Stan Groff's workshops. And
you did? I wondered.
Yeah, did a lot of that stuff.
What do you make of
Holotropic.
what do you make of the holotropic?
Well, so that's exactly why I never planned to share breathwork with human beings, in a way that I do now. But when I found his workshops were 3.5 hours and they were super intense. And then I worked with Dan Burley here in town a few times and similar, but a little bit more gentle and more playful, which I liked. But I also started to realize, the average person, like a captain at work or my mother, people I love and that are close to me would never go to those workshops. And if they did, it might trigger them or be destabilizing or not be beneficial, really. And I saw a bunch of people freak out and have bad experiences in those events. And, I had incredible experiences with them, and I started to explore on my own in this way, like, doing playlists and super ventilating on my own, because I like to do things alone a lot of times. But I would never encourage others to do it. I started to realize, like, I wanted to figure out a way to give people the ability to feel the power of the breath and to maybe have those somatic type experiences without inducing it or driving it or thinking that it's our best interest to give people that experience. I don't even think it's something we should encourage people to do. So over time, I started to realize we needed more slowing down, letting go as the medicine of our time, especially in the West. I think people struggle feeling and they struggle slowing down. So that's when I started to implement different components of all the things I had learned into a space where it was more about disarming people, giving people full freedom and permission to slow down, let go, have a nice anchor, and then maybe explore a little bit of some superventilation on a very subtle level if they choose, not even encouraging them to, and letting them feel a little bit of the power of the breath, and then coming back to the anchor so that we could teeter-totter back and forth to feel in a controlled environment what it's like to give you permission to have powerful control over your body, your breath, your nervous system. So it's a very gentle, conservative approach that I found to be very powerful. And now I have a recipe that just seems to work for people, hundreds of people. And I'm like, okay, this is safe and effective, but somebody that's the average plumber or someone who would never go to a yoga workshop or a breath workshop can come and feel safe there, good there. I don't add any weird spiritual language. I strip it down and I make it to where I think people can have the powerful experience without all the woo. And anyway, so that's how I got into it. I found that it was just too much.
I love the phrase super ventilatory. I haven't heard that before. That's great. Yeah, and you're speaking our language at Nordic also. My favorite style of breath play to coach is what we call balance breathing in the Nordic Flow ecosystem. And I like to joke, and it sounds like you and I share an interest in plant medicine. I call it LSD breathing light and slow and deep, or affectionately, I refer to it as natural microdosing. When you drop people into a balanced breathing exercise, even for just 5 minutes or so, and just ask them to observe how they feel at the beginning and at the end, I would say probably 7 out of 10 times people are like, I feel a little high. I feel like I'm slightly altered. And I'll simply observe. Isn't that amazing?
It's
that
incredible.
5 minutes of really light, meaning through the nose, mouth closed, slow, right? Using the mind to slow everything down, and deep into the diaphragm, as you know, not deep breaths, but deep into the belly, right? What the yogis call nose to belly, or nasal diaphragmatic, scientifically breathing. Just 5 minutes of that balanced approach to breathing opens up really the cosmos for so many people who are open to that little experience. And you're right, putting people in cyclic hyperventilation, or certainly holotropic, without any foundational preparation. Yeah, like you, I've seen a lot of people come unmoored, let's say. Yeah. So that's not our particular starting place in Nordic Flow. Again, back to the flow score. It's like just a simple long exhale. What does that teach you about how you're breathing in this moment? Just start there.
Yeah, I love that.
And the other thing you said that's interesting, I'm so fascinated by the mystery and the magic and the spiritual contexts for breath play. We don't lead with that at Nordic Flow because, like science, I think spirituality can be off-putting for many people. I think both the spiritual community, let's say, and the scientific community, let's say, have done a fabulous job of wonking everything out to the point where people are like, "Ooh,
Yeah,
I
a
don't
lot of
know.
times I'm embarrassed to be affiliated with breath work because of the marketing of the woo. Everybody's got the costume and they're filming people in these vulnerable states, which drives people in all kinds of directions where now you get people that
Yeah.
want to be seen on social media. So I don't believe in filming these things. And, then you see people screaming and shaking and all the stuff that the somatic guys are teaching. But I just feel like now everybody that sees it goes, I'm never going to go near breath work. This is some sort of occultic thing.
Yeah.
And, it's like anything. Unless you're there, you don't know. You shouldn't be filming people on mushrooms or on psychedelics either, because you're vulnerable and you may sign some waiver that says, yeah, I'm willing to be filmed or whatever. But you don't know what you're going to be, what kind of state you're going to be in once you're in that place. And 10 years from now, maybe you were going through a very vulnerable part of your life. Do you really want that captured on the internet 10 years from now? So I think it's sort of a weird way of marketing vulnerability, and I do not appreciate it.
God, that's beautifully said. I hadn't quite thought about it in that way. And the other thing I would piggyback on is there's an intimacy to the breath and to breathing that is in best shared thoughtfully, I would say, and privately mostly. And there is an interesting tension, I think, in the breath training industry, let's say, across the board. And yeah, how do you share this information in a way that's respectful, um, and honors the intimacy, and I like your word too, the vulnerability
Mm.
that humans, I think, often very quickly find themselves in when they drop in to the flow, let's say,
Hmm.
of the breath. Even a simple exercise like the flow score. And I will often start my own teaching and coaching workshops and retreats with the flow score because it prompts so much beautiful uh, observing about the breath amongst a group of people without it being too vulnerable or too intimate. It's like, okay, single exhale. How'd that feel? What'd you notice? The good, the bad, the ugly.
Mm.
And immediately people are like, oh, let me tell you.
Yeah.
It's really quite something.
I love it. Yeah, I recently, through your podcast on the way forward, I heard you mention Brooke at Musical Breathwork. So I gave it a listen and I was blown away by her knowledge base. And now I'm
Mm.
diving into her stuff and she's going to come on the podcast. But I
Oh,
love the way
good.
she communicates breathwork in a beautiful way and fascia, and she's grounded and she's an amazing teacher. I'm like, it's so rare to find really good teachers. And when you do, you go, okay, so I like word of mouth as the best form of sharing,
Mm.
because when you have the direct experience, you tell the people you love. And so it organically spreads. And before we had the internet, people would travel and risk their lives to go to certain places like Chavin. And it would take weeks and months at a time and not over easy terrain to go to these centers where there was these rites of passage, wachuma and things like this. And you're like, okay, this was pre-marketing, pre-internet, pre-algorithm. And so it was that powerful and profound. So I think the real magic and truthful stuff, it spreads because it works naturally.
Yeah, that's a beautiful insight too. And yeah, shout out to Brooke. I actually took her online course last winter, having heard her on the Way Forward. Shout out to Alec, the Way Forward.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I learned quite a bit about fascia, and I love her metaphor of tuning your body as if it were a musical instrument. Like, I'm a
Mm-hmm.
musician myself, and I really found that an apt metaphor. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and the other thing you said there got me thinking. Back to the woo. I don't love that term either. I sort of put it in the same category as breath work, although it's good shorthand.
Mm-hmm.
And your point about marketing the woo, I think, is so insightful. And um, we know from our study of every religious and spiritual tradition in world history, Eastern, Western, indigenous, that humans figured out a long time ago that conscious strategic breathing is maybe our most fundamental, our most elemental human superpower. And they baked that knowledge into chants and mantras and prayers and songs across the world.
Mm.
And that is something I first really was introduced to in James Nestor's book. And I'm a bit of a, I sense you are too, a bit of a, not just a science geek and a spiritual geek, but also a word geek. And the breath coaches understand, I think, that in every religious and spiritual tradition and in every language, there is at the core of that particular culture words and phrases that resonate with the power of breath. I mean, my favorite example, because we speak English here, is that Latin root spira, spiritus, which gives rise to so many powerful words in English, like spirit or spirits or spiritual. When we respire, respiration, we breathe in flow with the rest of living creation over and over again. As James Nestor says, I love this, respiration is reciprocation.
Mm.
Like we're literally receiving and giving back energy to all living, breathing things around us, 20,000 breaths per day. It's astonishing. You know, it's not a miracle. It's like 20,000 that we can partake, right? When we aspire, aspiration, to aspire means to breathe your way upwards to a higher goal or vision. Aspiration. It's a very powerful word. When we inspire one another, what that means from the Latin root is we're breathing good energy into one another. Inspiration, right? And my favorite is conspire, conspiracy.
Mm.
To conspire is to breathe together for strategic purpose. And I think the word conspiracy gets a bit of a bad rap these days, understandably. Very strange time for Team Human. And to quote the great Catherine Austin Fitts, if you're not in a conspiracy, get in one right away, because that's where all the fun, all the magic is going down, right?
Yeah.
Like a family is a conspiracy. A romantic or platonic relationship is two or more people breathing together for strategic purpose. So I think we do ourselves a disservice when we forget that each human possesses this unique, fundamental, elemental superpower that is conscious strategic awareness of breathing. And back to the quiver of arrows, we can just, anytime we want, we can just reach into that quiver and pull out those arrows and co-create, as the quantum physics like to say, picking up on what the mystics have known for a long time, co-create our own reality through this strange, mysterious, magical power of conscious strategic breathing. It's quite something.
Yeah. Oh, I love the way you put that. So beautiful. Words are so powerful and so important to bring awareness to, because a lot of times we just think internally, externally, without really understanding what words we're using and which words we've been handed. And so, as you were saying that with the word conspiracy, how the CIA weaponized that word so that you could discredit people really quickly. And they do that all the time. And I think you've studied propaganda, which we can get into, and how people use these words, but even as a psychological tool for warfare, which we can use for healing and transformation and all the beauty in words for empowering ourselves and for healing. And programming ourselves in the most healthy way, like in breath work, things like breath play, if you want to call it, using powerful healing words. The power of gratitude is like my favorite word, because appreciation for the fact that you're breathing right off the bat should be one of the first, to me, relationships that we bring awareness to. The fact that you're breathing and it's automatic and it's the first thing you do when you come out of the womb. It's so beautiful. So even that by itself is something as the first prayer that I like to use in my life, as like, if you're going to cultivate a relationship with the breath, which is what we're doing, we're sort of spending time with it, bringing awareness to it. I love to also be careful with what words I'm using, not careful, full of care, I guess, in a healthy way, not, oh my gosh, don't judge it or be too obsessed with it. But I like to think about with intention, how am I using my words internally in this state? And I love to just be appreciative of the fact that I'm alive and awake and aware, and I'm here, and I have lungs that are working and a heart that's pumping, and I have an environment that's sort of breathing me. So I love to bring in gratitude with breath, as like, if you don't know where to start with the breath, just start paying attention to the fact that you're breathing and be grateful for that fact. And that's such an incredible thing without even getting into all the deeper pieces, because that's medicine. So gratitude is medicine.
Yes. Yes. Beautifully said. Beautifully said. And when we begin to recognize that we are in flow with the rest of living and breathing creation, 20,000 breaths per day, however many it is for you, for me, for each individual, being in flow with the rest of living and breathing creation is truly miraculous. And again, I think we as humans have done ourselves a disservice the past several hundred years by pushing a lot of this mystery to the margins in the name of science or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. I know you and I are both fond of the work of Dr. Rupert Sheldrake, who I had a chance to visit with when I was in England earlier this year. Shout out to him. He's just so remarkable. Mm-hmm. He has a really beautiful take on breathing. He said, think of your inhale as meditation, and think of your exhale as prayer. And I really like that. Like when you breathe in, that's sort of your opportunity to give gratitude to the fact, as you just said, Ryan, that you're alive and in flow. And on the exhale, when we exhale, that takes the form of human speech and song and prayers and chants and mantras and language and all the things that humans can be very good at. That exhale becomes our way of acting in the world and giving back. CO2 we return to the plants. The words that we use, again, help shape
I love that.
the reality. Yeah. So the inhale is meditation, the exhale is prayer. And then we tend to think of a single breath as a two-part invention, right? Inhale and exhale. But it's really 4 parts at least. And you know this from your work with pranayama. It's like there's the inhale, yes, but then there's the pause. And then there's the exhale. And then, there's another pause or an opportunity to pause. So really a single breath can be 4 or more parts as we begin to really appreciate what happens at the pause up here. And as the yogis will remind us even more powerfully, the pause down here. Right? A breath pause at the bottom of an exhale is like, there's like an eternity in there. What is going on? And we can I've said this to our coaches when we train, you can actually control, or not control, you can steer the speed of time itself with your breathing. And they're like, what? Like, you've been doing it all weekend. Yeah. When you begin to sort of notice your breath, and then you begin to consciously and strategically pull those arrows out of the quiver, right? Notice what happens to the flow of time in your mind, your body. You feel it. You're like,
yeah.
It's like, that's kind of miraculous too.
Yeah, that's incredible.
You can influence the flow of time.
Yeah, you can break free from that linear model that's sort of in our traditional, linear mind, which is what
Yeah.
we've created. But I'd love to get into this idea of geoengineering, all of what's happening. But it starts, it seems, with the war on carbon. It seems like there's like this always war on drugs, war on terror, war on viruses. Anytime you hear the state or whoever is in power say there's a war on something, but now there's a war on life, this climate change thing. And I'm curious how you even got involved in this field, being a historian, I guess you could say, and then how you became aware of it to the point where you built a website and now you're speaking about it and trying to bring human consciousness to the table to have the discussion, because it's very strange when you try to talk to the average person about this subject we're about to dive into.
Mm. Yeah. So geoengineering is an umbrella word for what might be defined as strategic weather manipulation and climate modification. And to make maybe a neat segue from breathing to geoengineering, the
Mm-hmm.
two are much more intertwined than we might think at first blush, because if we humans are in flow with the rest of living, breathing creation, 20,000 breaths per day, the quality of the atmosphere, the environment in which we find ourselves, which surrounds us, is of paramount interest to humans and all living, breathing things. And unfortunately, geoengineering, I think, has really messed with our natural world in ways which most humans, as you just said, are not all that much aware of, which is strange. We can talk about kind of the storytelling elements of that. To answer your first question, how did I get involved? So I have a dear friend, co-conspirator. He's now in his mid-80s here in Vermont, Ian Baldwin. Shout out to Ian Baldwin, lifelong environmentalist, bird watcher, founder of Vermont's most powerful independent publishing house called Chelsea Green Publishing. Now retired, of course. And Ian called me one day about 8 years ago, and he said, "Rob, we got to meet for coffee. I need your help with something." So, of course, he's been a friend and mentor for me for years. So when your mentor calls, you show up. So we had coffee, and he shared with me a 70-page essay he had written about strange activity in the skies above here in Vermont. He said, "I'd love you to read this and edit it for me." It's like, all right, I'm busy. I'm raising kids, running a yak farm, teaching at the university. I got a
Mm-hmm.
wife, right? I got other projects, but sure, I'll do this because you're Ian Baldwin. You're my mentor. You're my friend, of course. So I read it. I give it back to him. I said, this is astonishing. I'm not sure what to make of it, because he's writing about these strange trails in the sky, and he's delved into the science and the history a little bit, where geoengineering has emerged from in the United States as a government and military and corporate project. It goes back almost 100 years. I'm kind of like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
wow, okay. And it was too much for me at that time. So I gave him back the paper. I said, I made some edits. Good luck. And he looks at me and says, no, you don't fully understand. I need your help. I said, well, I read the paper. I edited it for you. He said, we got to do something about this. I said, you're right, but I don't, my plate's full. But let's stay in touch, of course. So a few months go by. He calls me back. He's like, let's have coffee. We have coffee. He's like, so what are we going to do about this? I said, all right. What do you think, Ian, we should do about this? He said, well, at the very least, we should publish some history about geoengineering, because there's no one really doing that. A few people, but And oh, by the way, I've started this collaboration with a nuclear geochemist named Dr. J. Marvin Herndon in San Diego, who's been studying this from a scientific perspective for 40 years in his independent lab. And we've been publishing peer-reviewed science papers. I'm like, oh, okay. Oh, and oh, by the way, Rob, we're now in conversation with a public health advocate and official in Broward County, Florida, who's seeing the same thing down there and is now collaborating with us to publish peer-reviewed scientific papers. So I said, okay, why don't we start a website? Let's put a budget together. We'll raise some money, and we'll start putting these peer-reviewed scientific papers and these environmental history papers, let's start putting these online. And that's how our geoengineeringage.org was born.
Okay.
And that was about 8 years ago now. And I'm sure you've had this experience, Ryan. Once you see and begin to understand what's happening in our skies overhead, as the Celtic Christians like to say, in the cathedral of earth and sea and sky, you can't unsee it. And it is amazing that so many people are, or seemingly are, oblivious to this most unnatural activity that happens in the skies overhead on a regular basis. But that's where we are, right, as a species. So OGA, our geoengineeringage.org, was born. We've now published, I think, to bring it up to the present moment, gosh, probably almost 50 peer-reviewed scientific papers about the scientific and environmental implications of ongoing geoengineering. And Ian has led the charge on 2 different environmental historical series at the website. This is all for free, by the way, so people can go and investigate for themselves at our geoengineeringage.org. 2 series, one on the history of weather manipulation and climate modification, and the other on the history of electricity and electromagnetic energy, without which geoengineering would not be possible. I think obvious and maybe some not so obvious reasons. Yeah. Do you know the book, by the way, The Invisible Rainbow?
You know, I have it sitting on my desk ready to read. I got it in the mail a few months ago, and it's ready to be read. I actually just now popped it out as my book to reread. So I'm excited to dive into it.
Yeah, Arthur Furstenberg, who recently passed, shout out to Arthur, lived in Santa Fe, New Mexico.
He died this year, right? Like 2025?
Yeah, this year, a few months back,
Yeah.
Not before publishing one last book, which was really his kind of biography, his autobiography of his journey to understanding all this stuff. But The Invisible Rainbow is a pretty useful introduction to the history, what he calls in the subtitle, the environmental history of electricity. Worth a close read. Not that he gets it all right, but he makes some really interesting, I think, well-founded observations there. So that's essentially what we're up to at OGA, and we now have a 5-person team: Dr. Herndon, our nuclear geochemist, Dr. Mark Whiteside, our public health advocate. Both of them have just retired. Ian Baldwin, who is really our patriarch, retired but still hard at work, living up in northern Vermont, here, the Canadian border. Myself as the lead publisher, and then Paul Bean, shout out to Paul Bean, who's our digital publisher, runs our Substack, our social media channels. He's very active. And we're really fortunate to have him. So it really is a team effort. And I say that in part, Ryan, because there are a lot of lone wolves out there in the geoengineering community, in the research space. And let's just say that it's a complicated community, the geoengineering community, for reasons we can get into. But it's nice to be a part of a team and to have built this collaborative project. We don't always agree within our team, but we always agree to disagree and find the way forward. So that's helpful.
I love it. And I'm glad that you've got the website and a collaboration going, because in that arena, just like any, there's a tactical approach to dismantle and discredit all of this
Yes.
stuff by using certain keywords and propaganda and to just make the whole thing seem like a mess. And they do that with everything, calling you an anti-vaxxer or whatever you want to use as a word, which we can get into. But I don't know if you've ever heard of the book Going Somewhere by Andrew Marino. Have you heard of
No.
this? Okay. It's similar to what we're talking about, where it's a life in science, and he writes this book about his time with Robert Becker in a lab. And he spent about 17 years with his mentor, Robert Becker, and they shut his lab down once he started to discover some of the negative effects of non-native EMF and things like that. And it was all the power companies and everybody. And so he got his degree in law. He was a biologist, but to fight these giant companies. And it was a fascinating book. And I even had Andrew on the podcast. He's a really
Yes,
neat guy.
I have heard this book now. I'll go and listen. I just wrote myself a note. I'll go and listen to your interview with him because, yeah, Robert Becker was a real pioneer
Mm-hmm.
here in the lab,
Yep.
looking at the positive and negative consequences of electromagnetic energy.
Yep.
Michael Lewis at not
Levin.
MIT.
Michael Levin.
Sorry, Michael Levin. Michael Levin. Yeah.
Yep.
And you interviewed him as well, I believe.
Yep. And he
Yeah.
doesn't want to go into that stuff very much. I think he likes to keep the funding, and he's a really amazing scientist, but
Yeah.
also tied into all of these agencies that we're going to talk about,
Yeah.
but doing amazing work. I think he's a genius. But I even asked him about that stuff, and he did speak to it. But he's like, please don't take this out of context and just put a little clip on the internet, which I would never do.
Yeah. I listened to your long form conversation with him. Yeah, I followed his work for some years, and yeah, he's very careful, as one must be,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
for obvious reasons, given what
Yeah.
happened to Baker and others. Yeah.
Yeah, and what I was going to speak to when you were saying that, it made me want to bring up the fact that, like, why nobody's aware of this and why we're so suggestible right now, and going into the deep history of psyops and psychological warfare and how sophisticated that whole thing is. The development of the CIA. And I've really gotten very curious because you start to go, how can people be so naive, including myself? Why
Mm.
are we so distracted? Why is Brave New World unfolding, the book,
Mm.
And it's
Yeah.
really these weapons of distraction. And I
Mm.
think that, whether it be just incentives and the way that things work in an attention economy, or it's fully orchestrated and
Mm.
planned to keep people numb and willing to just give up their freedoms and to not question things. But the reason people don't see the sky is because they're staring at a screen. And the
Yeah.
reason people don't question authorities because the institutions are programming people to be fully suggestible and obedient and compliant. And so we're under hypnosis. And I think that peace in itself is uncomfortable to talk about for people,
It
and
is.
we don't want to reckon with the fact that we are being manipulated by very sophisticated psychological warfare. And I speak to it quite often because it's so important. We can't
Yeah.
get to the climate change thing or the COVID thing or any of the things that are coming down the next 5 to 10 years if we don't start to just pull our attention out of these systems and start to just get really uncomfortable with that shadow part of the system that we're a part of.
Yeah. And again, this is where conscious and strategic breath training is paramount.
Yeah, totally. Nervous system management.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you're right. There's a lot of fear being pumped into our hearts and minds and bodies on the regular.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and it's very, I don't love the word disempowering, but I think it probably works here. Disempowering. Well, let me do this before we get into sort of the history,
Yeah.
because people still may be wondering, like, gee, what exactly are they talking about? Yeah, so weather manipulation and climate modification refers to humans' ongoing interest in manipulating and controlling our environment.
Mm-hmm.
And arguably, we're the most powerful species on the planet at doing that, and have been for 300,000 years. We've been on this journey, if that's the official story anyway. Yeah. So when we talk about geoengineering and you look up at the sky, you may notice the appearance on the regular of unnatural, let's say, artificial, synthetic phenomena, which often take the appearance of trails. We don't like to use the chemtrails word because that word itself has been weaponized, but it's a popular term for weather modification and and climate manipulation efforts. Yeah. And really, sort of to describe it as simply as possible, geoengineering is about pumping and then jumping and then dumping. And what are we pumping and then jumping and dumping? Nanoparticulate metals and other microparticles into the atmosphere. We pump them into the atmosphere. There's a lot of different technological ways to do this. The backs of planes is probably the most obvious. So we put the U.S. military and corporate partners emplace the atmosphere, emplace these nanoparticulates in the atmosphere, and then jump them using electromagnetic frequency energy. Essentially, when you put nanoparticulate metals in the atmosphere, you're ionizing the atmosphere, you're turning the atmosphere into more of a battery for more efficient conduction of electromagnetic energy. And then when you jump, as if you're jumping a car battery, you jump the atmosphere with electromagnetic frequency technologies. It allows you to experiment with and manipulate, create, halt, steer weather systems, right? And then finally, the dumping, all of those nanoparticulate metals eventually have to find their way back onto the surface of the earth from the sky into the earth, the sea, the forests, the streams, coating all living things that can't move inside, right? The birds, the bees, the bats. And we've written about all of this extensively at ourgeoengineeringage.org. So if people are kind of like, I'm going to need some scientific proof for that, we have ample, as well as the history there. So pumping, jumping, and dumping refers to this use of these ever more sophisticated technologies to begin to, or to continue to experiment with weather manipulation and climate modification. And this whole phenomena goes back to the 1940s. I mean, it goes way back in human history. Like, I'm fond of pointing out that the Chinese emperors had weather manipulation and climate modification on their mind. And the phrase they used from the Mandarin in Chinese going back 5,000 years is smart human shadow work. To control the weather, smart human shadow work. The ancient Chinese studied the earth, the sea, the skies. They noticed these massive atmospheric rivers of moisture moving off the ground into the skies and back around on the regular. And they said, aha, if we can figure out how to manipulate these atmospheric rivers, we as an empire built on the movement of water, right? Irrigation, rivers on the ground. We can take that 3D and start manipulating the relationship between the sky and the ground through the weather as well. It's amazing when you get into the history of this. And if you look at China today, they have embarked on the largest and most ambitious weather manipulation and climate modification program in world history, which is called Operation Sky River on the Tibetan Plain. They're literally building thousands of silver iodide seeded 4-meter tubes across the ridge of the Himalayas and the mountains up there to strategically release silver iodide particles into the lower atmosphere and begin to, on the regular, steer weather systems across the Eurasian continent in directions that are beneficial to the Chinese empire, at the expense, of course, of other countries and peoples who are there. And they make no secret of this, by the way.
Yeah.
Because
what's incredible is that they're willing to do these projects, and people, the initial response is going to be, well, why would they do that? Even myself, when I first started to discover this stuff, is like, why would we do it if they're going to be affected as well? It's the same thing with the pandemic. Why would these people in power pollute the airwaves and the ecosystems and do all of this for power when they know that it's going to affect them ultimately in the long run, even if there was any form of agenda of them being left and a certain amount of people not being left, but you're completely destroying the environment. So what do you say to that?
So There are three reasons why the geoengineers do what they do. Reason number one, because they can. It's about power. And humans have suffered, perhaps, from too much hubris as a species since we've been humans on the planet, right? This is in some ways, Ryan, an Icarus story, right? How close to the sun will we fly with our wax geoengineering wings before we crash to the earth and burn, right? Power. Second reason is profit. There's tremendous amounts of money wrapped up in the military, industrial, corporate complex. Yes. And we should circle back to the official climate change story in a minute. But stay with us. Power, profit. And then this is the most disturbing reason, I think, but geoengineering allows for various population control measures, right? If you can deprive an entire country of water, as the president of Iran, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, said 20 years ago on the floor of the United Nations, other countries in the Middle East are waging war on our water. They're imposing a drought on Iran. And he was, of course, laughed at the time. But he was probably right, because the Iranians are as sophisticated a civilization as any. They're well aware of natural weather patterns and when those are being messed with. Yeah. So power and profit and population control. And I think to your question about psychopathy, maybe sociopathy, these are people for whom life has no meaning. And that might seem like a bold statement, but I think they are in their particular ivory towers and their bunkers. You probably know the work of Doug Rushkoff, his new book, Survival of the Richest.
Yeah.
Gives you a little bit of insight into how the minds and hearts of these select few work. Mm-hmm. And I don't think they think much about the consequences of their own actions for all living, breathing things, which is why Team Human needs to stand up and be counted for all of nature at this particular moment. And unfortunately, and maybe this is a good pivot, the official climate change story, as you started off our conversation here, acknowledging, is about waging war on carbon dioxide. CO2 and other greenhouse gases are the problem here. Carbon dioxide, our body's most important respiratory gas, right? Carbon dioxide, which triggers the urge to breathe in our bodies, which lubricates the flow of energy through hemoglobin, oxygen, right? Charge. There's some discussion about that through our bodies. Carbon dioxide, which catalyzes every one of our 50 to 60 trillion cells to breathe more efficiently. In its presence, we're going to wage war on carbon dioxide, really, which accounts for the greenery outside your office window. That's what we're going to do. Yeah. So if you're to look at the history of geoengineering, three parts. We see experiments from the 1940s up until the mid-1970s, Operation Popeye, the spraying over the skies of North Vietnam, geoengineering, trying to make it rain to flood the Ho Chi Minh Trail, essentially destroy North Vietnamese army supply lines, win the Vietnam War. Of course, that didn't happen. That was phase one. And the whistle gets blown on military geoengineering by Seymour Hersh. He's a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, calls this to the world's attention. Phase one ends. Phase two, the United Nations signs the Environmental Modification Treaty. The U.S. is a signatory in the late 1970s, calling for no more military use of geoengineering. No more weather manipulation and climate modification for military purposes as a weapon of war. Now, our contention at OGA is this treaty was written very carefully. We're going to take military geoengineering off the table, but we're going to leave open all other options for geoengineering, including, let's say, phase two, the introduction of the official climate change story by the early 1980s. Global warming will be catastrophic. The apocalypse is near. Armageddon is coming because greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide among them, is causing the planet to heat up, right? So we are going to do everything in our power to mitigate greenhouse gases. Welcome to phase two, the official launching of the climate change global warming narrative. Now, in the 1970s, before the Environmental Modification Treaty was signed, global cooling was the concern. There'll be a new ice age. There's some beautiful historical books written about this concern in the 70s on my shelf. The cooling is probably the best one. But by the 80s, it's global warming, right? So the entire and global environmentalist community, you probably noticed this, Ryan, have been sucked into this official narrative of global warming, of climate change, of waging war on carbon dioxide, our body's most important respiratory gas, the most important gas for plants to grow on the planet, in the name of avoiding the apocalypse, the Armageddon. Right? Yeah. It's amazing. So that story, which really goes back to the creation of Earth Day, Vermont environmentalist Bill McKibben's famous book, The End of Nature, published in 1988. I was just leaving college at that point, which puts the phrase global warming on the civilizational and cultural map, right? And from there, we've seen the growth of really sort of the climate change industry, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's phase two. And now phase three, I think what's happening, and this is encouraging, is more and more humans are awakening to the reality, the historical and environmental reality of geoengineering, the impact of weather manipulation and climate modification on all living, breathing things. The fact that most of this activity is being done in secret, often for military purposes or in conjunction with military and intelligence and corporate players who are very good at keeping a low profile. Yeah. And now we're in a very remarkable situation within the past 12 months in the United States. As you may have noticed, Ryan, I think there are now 35 states that have introduced legislation into state legislatures calling for stopping weather manipulation and climate modification in the skies over these states. Now, this is, as far as we can tell, a UN-funded and sanctioned project, geoengineering, under the auspices of the UN and their for-profit partner, the World Economic Forum, and all of these various intelligence agencies within, it seems, not just NATO countries, North Atlantic Treaty Organization countries, but also, as I said earlier, China, Russia, the Middle Eastern sheikdoms, right? They're all very public about the fact that they are geoengineering on the regular. The only country where citizens seem unaware or unwilling to acknowledge that this is happening is, of course, the United States, our own, for reasons which I think you stated quite well. We are immersed here. We're not looking up. We're being fed a constant diet of fear and disempowerment through all media channels, right? The most sophisticated media apparatus we've ever created in world history, with my professor of propaganda hat on. And we have an official story of climate change that blames humans breathing, cows farting, an overproduction of carbon dioxide. This goes all the way back to the 1980s, as we said. And environmentalists, and I put myself in that camp in even-numbered days, environmentalists are nothing if not virtuous, right? So to challenge the official story that has been embraced by the global environmentalist community is very, very challenging.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you do that when the thing that they're using is virtue signaling? It's almost like they did that with the jab. If you don't get it, then you're the part of the problem. And that's what they've always used is groupthink, because they know from all the experiments that they've done that people are going to go against what's true to fit in and conform with the hive to look virtuous among the others.
Yes, the parallels between the COVID-topian narrative and the climate change narrative are legion.
Yeah.
Someone could write a whole book just about that.
Mm-hmm.
People have touched on it. But yes, that's absolutely true. And in a culture where we are surrounded by screens and powerful propaganda, psychological operations layered on top of each other 24/7, again, to step back, disconnect, detether is the word I like, ourselves from the screens, and really bring ourselves into the presence, not just of our own mind and body and spirits, but our relationship back to respiration and reciprocation, our profound and miraculous relationship with
Yeah.
all living, breathing things. I think it begins there. It begins with conscious strategic breathing. And again, that might be like, we're going to end geoengineering, Rob, by becoming better breathers. Yes. Yes. The more humans we can train to be more aware of their breath and the remarkable flow of life that moves through us with every breath, the better chance we have.
Yeah.
In beginning to build communities who understand what's at stake.
Yeah.
And again, I refer people to our OGA website. Dr. Herndon, Dr. Whiteside have published 2 books on the so-called geoengineering chemtrails phenomenon. Lots of free stuff there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we are. 2 things are true, Ryan. We live, we humans, at the most remarkable moment for us as a species, and we are in flow with the rest of living, breathing creation. That's thing 1. Thing 2, there's a war on. There's a war on for the future, not just of the human species, but of all natural living, breathing creatures themselves. And both of those 2 things can be true simultaneously. You probably know Wendell Berry. Do you know Wendell Berry, the Kentucky poet? Yeah, he wrote this book called Life is a Miracle 20 years ago. Very short book. And it was a response to Harvard entomologist E.O. Wilson, the ant guy, brilliant scientist. It was a response to E.O. Wilson's at Harvard's book Consilience,
Mm-hmm.
in which Wilson called for using science, the scientific paradigm, to organize all forms of human knowledge. What could possibly go wrong, right? And Wendell Berry said that's a bad idea. The subtitle of his book, Life is a Miracle, is an essay against modern superstition. And by modern superstition, Wendell Berry meant science. But Wendell Berry says in that book, and I've never forgotten this, and I think about this every day, he said, there will come a time in the very near future where humans will have to choose between living as creatures and living as machines. Creatures in flow with the rest of living, breathing creation, or machines. The transhumanist impulse to merge our minds and bodies with our networked digital technologies. That time is now. We are at that crossroads.
There is a transhuman movement. The transhuman agenda is the thing we're seeing, and it's this glorification of the mind and of the scientific world. It is its own like religion, the technocracy, if you want to call it, or things like that. But the essence, like you said, the breath, the old yogis would know this. It was union. and realizing that you're not separate from anything. You're not separate from the environment. And so even the sun, it's like something I worship. I really love waking with the sun and spending as much time as I can getting natural light. It's like just the foundation of being human is your birthright of being out in a healthy environment. You're not separate from it. You can't breathe without a healthy environment. So the people that think it's their privilege or right to go and influence without looking at all the unintended consequences with their technology and the science and all the data, it doesn't matter what you think you know. You cannot block the sun or manipulate the weather. It's not something that we should even be voting on. It's just an obvious fact, and people don't believe it's happening. And it's the most important subject ever because it's a war on consciousness, human consciousness, planetary consciousness. It's a war on life, like you said. So it's so important.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautifully said, Ryan. Yeah, at OG, our mission statement is this. At our geoengineering age, our goal is to provide an evidence-based exploration of our planet's most pressing yet underreported environmental issue. Our planet, our Earth, our realm's most pressing yet underreported environmental issue. The fact that geoengineering flies under the radar, particularly of the environmentalist community, is astonishing to me. But then again, it's 50 years of programming with the official climate change narrative. And I'll give you just one example. I don't want to pick on him, but my Vermont environmentalist neighbor, Bill McKibben, probably the United States' most acclaimed, let's say, environmental activist. He lives 45 minutes down the road. Just published a new book about how solar power will save us. Now, this is the same Bill McKibben who writes in the New Yorker and other august publications about how geoengineering, Ryan, may be a desperate high-tech attempt to stave off the apocalypse that is coming with climate change, but nevertheless must or might have to be done. And if you hold those two things, you just made this point. If you hold the importance of the sun for all living, breathing things since we began this project here in the realm, you hold that up against blocking the sun, dimming the sun, right? It's truly insane.
Yeah.
It's not only nonsensical from a scientific point of view, it's insane. It's anti-life. And the transhumanist impulse, I think, at its core is, yes, you said it, a religion, technocracy, that is anti-life. What gives everything life? Oh, the breath. The breath. So again, coming back to our breath, optimizing mind, body, and spirit, and really developing a practice allows us then to take ourselves out into the world and stand on behalf of Team Human and Team Nature, I would say. And those two, human nature, they are essentially the same thing.
Yeah. And it helps you to slow down enough to see and to feel and to, even if you want to say it, grieve the truth, and to then come up with a solution and a plan in a responsive way, not a reactive way. And I feel like during the pandemic, the plandemic, whatever you want to call it, the most important thing was for people to not be persuaded and manipulated. And that's exactly what happened. Half the planet got, manipulated into getting something that's a bioweapon. And people don't want to talk about that still. People don't want to speak about 9/11. And I think the breath and that ability to just start to connect with what's true requires that slowing down and feeling uncomfortable. It's okay to feel uncomfortable and to not be hitting the dopamine button and try to feel good all the time, which is what our culture's promoting and pushing. And I think that is the psyop, is to keep everybody like Soma. What Brave New World talked about is to keep you just willing to just be distracted and, go to the next game, watch the next TV show, look at TikTok, and people don't even care. Right now, there's more selfies and digital narcissism than we've ever seen before. And people are not going to take the time to acknowledge all this if we don't slow down and connect with these fundamentals, or get outside and get natural light and get off the screen. So it's so important. These fundamentals are not to be overlooked, what you're talking about.
And they're fun.
And they're
And
fun.
they make you feel better. We started this conversation with you describing yourself in a sensory deprivation tank, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you said it was that experience provided enough silence, enough stillness for you to begin to recognize the miraculous power inside you that was your breath, your heartbeat, right?
Yeah.
And I bring this up because in some ways we are each called, and we have to figure out how to create an analogous experience in our own lives day by day. When I was teaching, and I still teach at the university level, all online now because I'm busy with these other projects, but I always say to my students, I said, the most important thing you will learn in this class is maybe this. Take this device and plug it in to charge every night as far away from your bed and your head as you possibly can.
Mm-hmm.
And put it into airplane mode. Give your mind and your body and your spirits a hard break from your digital self.
Mm-hmm.
And oh, by the way, students, the phrase digital self is not mine. That's the phrase that the tech lords use, because they're creating our digital selves in ever more sophisticated ways, moment by moment, byte by byte, day by day, on what's called the internet, in what's called the cloud. Isn't that an ironic term? Right?
Yeah.
And then when you turn them on in the morning, don't until you have had you time. And extend that you time, that analog self time, for as long as you can. Wake up, brush your teeth, go to the bathroom, take a walk, go for a run, go to the gym, leave your phone where it is, right? See how long you can extend that particular analog time for you. That will be the most important thing you will learn and practice in this course.
That's amazing.
Everything else we do is gravy.
Yeah. No, it's such that's an important message to share with your students, because they probably don't get that message very often. And in the float tank, it wasn't just the connection with the breath. It was also my ability for the first time to see my thoughts as something separate than me, which I don't think most people even can relate to. That piece of awareness that I didn't know anything about meditation, but that piece of seeing my conditioning, my programming, that most of myself and the parts of me that I thought were me were just conditioned. And then you realize, holy shit, what do I do with this? Now I got to go and reverse engineer and see who I actually am. And so it required a lot more floats. I was doing 4-hour floats, and it became this interesting phenomena of like, okay, who's running the social engineering program in the institutions? And you read books about the education system, and it becomes an interesting rabbit hole that people don't have time for, or do they feel comfortable pursuing. And it's interesting is I don't think most people should do that. Like someone like my mother, who's an amazing mom, she shouldn't take on the burden. I don't think somebody shouldn't be a brain surgeon. There's so many unique humans out there, but just the bare fundamentals of, like you said, keeping away from the screen time in the morning, maybe take 3 conscious breaths. It doesn't have to be go float in the float tank and start reading history about MK Ultra. And so I realized I did that because I'm very curious. I'm so curious. It doesn't stop. I'm always learning, exploring, and I love to share along the way. But I've also dropped the burden of thinking other people should take that on. And I realized I want people to feel good. And part of that is to raise awareness around some of the things that are going on, and each individual in their capacity to serve others or to help or to create art or whatever it is they're going to do are going to do it with a little more awareness of what's happening. And then they aren't also being subjected to these psyops that are always being deployed upon us.
Yeah. I just listened to your conversation with Nico,
Okay.
Martin's.
Mm-hmm.
I'd not known of his work before. And you said something a moment ago about grieving. And I think grieving is important. And what Nico said that really resonated for me in your conversation with him is the importance of harmonizing rather than letting our emotions run away with us, right? Um, and the Faraday cage example was really instructive. He said, people who cloak themselves to block the harmful electromagnetic energy also give up access to the good stuff, right? Let's not do
Mm-hmm.
that, right? Let's learn how to harmonize some of these negative frequencies, let's say, for lack of a better term, through everything you and I have just been talking about here. Rather than running away or being fearful, let's lean into our superpowers as humans to co-create the reality as we flow through the world,
Mm.
right? With the arrows and other powerful protocols, techniques, things that we've learned how to do. That was a really powerful message for me. Because I think, like you, like most of us, when we look up at the sky on any given day, we're like, there they go. It's a perfectly beautiful blue sky day. And our immediate tendency is to get pissed or drop into fear mode, the sympathetic nervous system. We're going into fight, flight, fright. Rather than that, it's like, okay, I see what they're doing up there. Just going to relax into it. This is the reality through which we are moving in the world, and we have the power to influence everyone and everything around us. And again, the mystic, they figured this out thousands of years ago, right?
Yeah.
And science has sort of poo-pooed all of this stuff under the guise of woo-woo, right?
Yeah.
But for anybody like you or me, or those listening and watching who has felt what we're describing here, it's incredibly liberating. And it's incredibly, again, don't love the word empowering, it's overused, but it is. It is, yeah.
Yeah.
You had asked me to read, back to geoengineering, this letter from The Guardian, which I think summarizes kind of what we're up against as good as anything
Yeah. I would
that
love
I've
that.
run across in my 8 years of research. Would this be a good time?
I would love that. And to just finish what you were just saying about that piece, because I think it's important for people
Please.
to not feel hopeless or feel obsessed with, I got to, block the EMF, and it can become so stressful for people. I like to help people to remember that we've been here a long time, doing this for a long time, and you're connected with all your ancestors. And then, that spiritual component with the breath and the slowing down and connecting with nature. There's a little bit of a letting go piece. Like you said, Rupert Sheldrake said, the prayer comes from the exhale. I was thinking back to that as you were speaking just now, that the letting go part is also a little bit of surrender. And that's your faith, is to trust the deeper, older part of yourself that's been here for a long time. And we humans have always had tyrants and people that were working from dark magic or whatever you want to call it in the negative. And there's always been amazing people on this planet. There always will be. And to look around, like Mr. Rogers would say, for the helpers, and to just stay motivated and stay in faith, like let go a little bit. Trust the process. Life doesn't just end when you die. And so the technocrats and the people that are pushing all this shit, what they're going to use is fear, like we keep saying. And I think that piece doesn't work on people that are connected to something bigger. So now we can go back into some of the shadow stuff. But I just like to remind people, because it's important for me to be reminded and remind myself, but also the people I love. And so we gotta just not be in fear, and to really encounter death as an opportunity to be here. So anyway.
God, so beautifully, so beautifully said, Ryan. Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you. So, yeah, you had asked me before we began to share this. This is a letter that was written to the Guardian newspaper in the UK. The Guardian being sort of Great Britain's most august environmentalist, let's say, news journal among other news. And this was a letter, very short, written by a guy named Matt Anderson, who identifies himself as the former executive advisor, aerospace and defense for a company called Booz Allen Hamilton, which some of your audience may know. Booz Allen Hamilton is a large corporate consulting and accounting company. Booz Allen Hamilton he was out of Chicago, but they're all over the world, and they work with powerful militaries and governments and corporations. So this is Matt Anderson, retired from Booz Allen Hamilton. And the name of this particular letter is called At War Over Geoengineering in The Guardian, February of 2012. And he writes this, Matt Anderson, At War Over Geoengineering. He says, few in the civil sector fully understand that geoengineering is primarily a military science and has nothing to do with either cooling the planet or lowering carbon emissions. While seemingly fantastical, weather has been weaponized. At least 4 countries, the United States, Russia, China, and Israel, possess the technology and organization to regularly alter weather and geologic events for various military and black operations, which are tied to secondary objectives, including demographic, energy, and agricultural resource management. Demographic management, by the way, is a polite way of talking about population control. Demographic management. He ends by saying, indeed, warfare now includes the technological ability to induce, enhance, or direct cyclonic events, earthquakes, drought, and flooding, including the use of polymerized aerosol viral agents and radioactive particulates carried through global weather systems. Various themes in public debate, including global warming, have unfortunately been subsumed into much larger military and commercial objectives that have nothing to do with broad public environmental concerns. These objectives include the gradual warming of polar regions to facilitate naval navigation and resource extraction. Matt Anderson, former executive advisor, aerospace and defense, Booz Allen Hamilton, Chicago. We make a case at OGA that a lot of the activity that we're seeing in the skies has to do with actually warming regions of the Earth, not cooling them, to melt polar ice caps to give access to the tremendous stockpiles of natural resources under the Arctic Circle and probably in Antarctica as well. And Ian has written a couple of beautiful, short, accessible, free historical pieces about this. But going back to the early 1970s, the United States and the Soviet Union signed at least one treaty in Vladivostok in which they called for using technology to melt the polar ice caps to open up resources for extraction. So again, for people who are kind of like, this all sounds a little skeptical of this, the history is very clear, right? We have tens of thousands of pages of public documents. And again, we just provide kind of access to those through our website for free. But for any human who is concerned about the future of the species, the fate of all living, breathing things, the protection and preservation of nature in flow with all living, breathing things, especially my brothers and sisters in the environmentalist community who really need to come to terms with this. Mm-hmm. I would suggest that we need to take the geoengineering phenomenon seriously. Weather manipulation is happening. Climate modification is real. And we need to put our big kid pants on
Yeah.
as a civilization and as a species, and really begin to make sense of what's going on up there
Hmm.
and out here.
Yeah. Can you
In the
describe?
cathedral of earth, sea, and sky. I keep coming back to that phrase because it's such a beautiful phrase from the Celtic Christians, the cathedral. We live in a cathedral of earth, sea, and sky, and we have an obligation to steward it.
Hmm, I love that. Can you describe HAARP to people that have never
Yes,
heard of this term and
yes.
what it is?
Yeah, so I was 10 years old when the movie Star Wars, the original, came out in 1977. That was also the same year, 1977, that the High Altitude Active Auroral Resource Project, HAARP, I'll say that again, the High Altitude Active Auroral Research Project, was created in the tiny town of Gakona in north central Alaska. And HAARP is a phased array antenna system. Imagine metal poles sticking out of the ground in a giant concrete platform square, yeah? And with antennae on them. And electromagnetic energy can be pushed through these antennae in sequenced fashion and then directed up towards the sky. So HAARP was the pilot project, the prototype for what are now these EMF systems that are located all over the world. And again, this will be new knowledge for people who are not familiar. But we have a networked series of phased array antennas that are using very sophisticated electromagnetic technologies in concert with the nanoparticulate metals that ionize various layers of the atmosphere to beam and move around, or attempt to. Some of this is very experimental, but I think they've come a long way in 50 years, yeah, with the original HAARP. Steer and move around weather systems and modify the weather and the climate. And we have seen a lot of these technologies in action, although they've been cloaked, these technologies, by other explanations for them. The most obvious would be the so-called wildfires in Canada, in California. We do have a new documentary film coming out. It's going to be premiering October 17th at the Weston A. Price Foundation National Conference in Salt Lake City, Utah. I will be there. Shout out to the filmmaker, Ariana Victor, who actually grew up in Paradise, California, and watched her whole community burn in 2018 and realized, as many of us did, that's like, there's something very unnatural about what's going on here. Now, you are a firefighter, so you might want to weigh in here on the so-called wildfires. I'll pause for a moment.
Yeah, it's like any subject where you start to dig into this stuff and you realize it just doesn't look right with all of the situations that have happened over the last 10 years, 15 years, even going back to 9/11. I just had Kurt Weldon on, and
Yes, I saw that.
I'm willing to look at all this stuff and go, yeah, that's not natural, or that was orchestrated. And I don't know exactly what happened in Lahaina and what happened in California, but I know that it wasn't all just natural. And I do believe that some of that stuff could have even been prevented if you wanted to look at it just as a rationalist that doesn't believe in any of this geoengineering. The way that the wildland firefighting has been deployed and orchestrated and all the politics involved, you could even look at it as a lot of that's been orchestrated to allow things to build up over time to then create events like that. Or you could just say it's bad politics and people have money interests. There's a million ways to poke at it. For the people that are super conservative and not willing to be skeptics and to question the government and to think that these people are bad actors, then just look at it as messy politics and bad incentives. But it's far beyond that. It's far more nefarious, unfortunately. And until you're willing and ready to take on the truth, you're going to have to just keep your head down and keep getting busy and distracted. But I think it's time for people to start questioning everything And if they don't, then we're in a real heap here in the next 5-10 years with all these people that have the Great Reset plan. And I'm tuned into it just enough from an abstract, low resolution view to realize we're in trouble as a species. And it's time for people to pay attention to the ugly, shadowy stuff. And it's not comfortable, you know?
Yeah, yeah. To be able to hold the shadow and the light in front and within us simultaneously is no easy feat. But yes, it's time. And I love what you said a few minutes ago. There have always been, uh, for lack of a better, the forces of darkness have always been with us, including in our own hearts. Yeah, and the forces of light have always been with us. And I mean, it's the stuff of Hollywood movies, of course, right? But all of our most popular stories in the culture, the Chronicles of Narnia, the Lord of the Rings,
Mm-hmm.
um, the Chronicles of Prydain, the Fast and the Furious. It's like, what are they about? They are about humans wrestling with our capacity for good and for evil both, and how we conspire to create positive outcomes over the forces of darkness, which again
Mm.
we all embody. Yeah, it's a really interesting time. And just to close the loop on the wildfires, because people are still probably like, wait a minute, geoengineering and fire, what? So nanoparticulates fall to the earth. They coat the trees, the forest floor, the streams, all living creatures over time. Those nanoparticulate metals desiccate the trees. They dry them out. They coat the bark. They make them more flammable, the trees. So if and when a fire comes along, right, naturally or artificially induced, those forests are ripe for not just burning, but for conflagration. And by the way, this is an interesting, I have never talked about this on a podcast, it's brand new, but there's a new film out of Hollywood directed by Paul Greengrass, who did the Flight 93 official 9/11 Hollywood movie, if you will, called The Lost Bus, starring Matthew McConaughey. Shout out to Matthew, great actor. Which is about a bus driver in Paradise, California in 2018 who is called to rescue a group of 22 school children from the burning town as the fire consumes the town. And I'm going to guarantee you, Ryan, I haven't seen the movie yet, but they're not going to talk about geoengineering
No.
or weather manipulation or climate modification in the movie. But I heard McConaughey chat with Joe Rogan about his new book of poetry the other day. And at the last 10 minutes of this 3-hour conversation, he mentions this movie, The Lost
Mm.
Bus. And he says, McConaughey to Rogan, he's like, yes, the star of the movie, The Lost Bus, is really the fire. Fire as predator. And my ears perked up. I was like, yes, that's what we're describing when we talk about geoengineering, right? We are taking natural systems and making them more predatory as a military, let's say, exercise, right? Back to the
Yeah.
military, the secret military uses of these technologies going all the way back,
Yeah.
almost 100 years. Operation Storm Fury, Project Cirrus, right? 1940s and 50s. We're going to work to steer hurricanes in directions at will. And
Mm.
again, this is just history now at
Yeah.
this point. So I'm curious, as we release our film, Just Look Up, on October 17th, we're seeing the emergence of kind of, official narratives through Hollywood movies about wildfires and
Mm-hmm.
human heroism in the
Yeah.
face of these predatory wildfires. It's just kind of an interesting little nugget to chew on there when we think about maybe is a way to pull it all together, the psychological operation, the fifth generation information wars being waged on our minds and hearts and bodies, disguised as a story of human inspiration, which
Yeah.
in some ways it is, right? It can be both. And the importance of really centering and grounding ourselves in our breath and being very mindful, attuned to the stories we drop into and flow with. Because those stories, more than anything, really, are what help us live and breathe and move and have our being.
Mm.
Those stories are fear-based, negative, debilitating, disempowering.
Mm.
It's not good for the species.
Yeah. And then the amount of money that the military uses for predictive programming through film and music, people don't realize that there's a huge budget
Oh,
to,
yes.
orchestrate certain narratives and then to really focus in on the heroic components of certain military events that have happened. And you're like, wow, let's go do book signings. And this guy was a hero, but they never talk about, it's a distraction. They don't talk about why we were over there in the first place. So I've seen this over and over again.
Yeah, the glorification of individuals over institutions and organizational decisions. And also, I would say, the glorification of trauma now,
Yeah, big time.
right? Born on the 4th of July, the hurt locker, the assassin, I mean, there's hundreds now. And I've just noticed this with my professor of media and propaganda hat on. The past couple of decades, probably since 9/11, actually, we've seen kind of these very well-funded Hollywood stories and TV stories of the glorification of trauma in the face of catastrophe.
Yeah.
Dystopian stories, which is fascinating.
Yeah. Well, it sort of feeds into the trauma culture, which is a whole thing that we can do a separate podcast on. But there's a marketing of trauma now, even though we all know that that's a thing we need to heal and there is trauma, but human history is traumatic and we're very resilient and adaptable. And this pharmaceutical industry and even the psychedelic therapy community and the word trauma has been weaponized to make people feel permanently victimized, to be on a never ending, eternal self-interest, narcissistic loop of the next therapy, the next medicine. It's not you. Don't pay attention to the fact that your culture is sick and that you're living you should feel uncomfortable and weird and not healthy inside of it's not good to be well adapted to an insane society, as I've heard Krishnamurti
Yes.
say. So they're distracting you again with this never ending. It's you that's the problem. Let's medicate you. You're the one that's got the problem. Instead of you pulling away from it and looking at it as, holy shit, you should feel insane right now if you're not paying attention to it. So I'm big on calling out trauma culture a little bit.
Yeah, I've heard you do that a little bit, and to add to that, on the positive side too, each of us has the capacity within us to heal over time, mind, body, spirits, and again, the breath, the quiver of arrows, right? Powerful, superhuman
Yeah.
tools, and the word tools doesn't do it any justice, but. Our breath is, in many ways, conscious strategic breathing is, in some ways, our best ally, our best friend, our best colleague, our best co-conspirator in bringing about healing over time that all of us can benefit from. But you're never going to hear that in a Hollywood movie or a pharmaceutical TV commercial, Brian.
Yeah, I love that. Maybe we could end with a little bit of some coherent breathing, unless you got to get going.
No, let's end. Yeah, so if we bring ourselves into seated position with the feet on the floor, that's a great place to end. So feel free, if you're listening, not driving, listening, close your eyes, gently shut our mouths. Let's place maybe our left hand on our heart, right hand on our belly. Just take a moment, relax the shoulders. Noticing the breath for just a moment. And let's meet at the bottom of our next exhale in 3, 2, 1. Take a nice steady breath in through the nose. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 and out. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 and in. Find the rhythm. Relax. 2, 1 and out. Stretch it out. Relax. 2, 1 and in. And out. And in. And out. Last one in. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Last one out. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Pause if that feels comfortable. At the bottom. Whenever you're ready, acknowledging the breath and letting your breath return to steady, regular flow. When you feel ready, slowly blinking open your eyes, coming back into the space, maybe noticing that little bit of heat there, fingertips, palms of your hands on your body. Maybe shout out of gratitude for your heart, for your diaphragm. Shaking out the hands, coming back into the space, opening up the eyes. So that's a very simple breathing pattern called coherence breathing, as you know, Ryan. It's also goes by many names: resonant breathing, coherence breathing. But my favorite term for that little exercise is called the perfect breath. It's 5.5 seconds in, 5.5 seconds out, 5.5 breaths per minute, 5.5 liters volume of air moving through the body each minute. And it's probably the most powerful way to use your breath to synchronize, to integrate heart, nervous system with the power of the breath. And you will find in every religious and spiritual tradition in world history, East, West, Indigenous, a chant or a mantra or a prayer or a song that lasts exactly the same length. It's the perfect breath. My favorite example of this from Buddhism, I'm not a Buddhist, but I drop into Buddhist monasteries all the time. I find a lot of value in Buddhism is the Om Mani. If you watch my fingers, Om Mani Padme Om. Om Mani Padme Om. It's the perfect breath as a Buddhist mantra. And you'll find that everywhere. Kind of like geoengineering, Ryan. Once you see it, the perfect breath, once you feel it, you can't unfeel it. It's very powerful. And that's a good place to end. That really is, I think, the perfect breath is perhaps another name for meditation and prayer. To Rupert Sheldrake, inhale, meditation, exhale, prayer.
It's beautiful. And I think you already did it, but I always ask every guest, if you were going to die today, would you want to share anything else with the world?
3 words: breathe, here, now.
It's beautiful. It's been really an honor to speak with you, and I hope I get to meet you in person someday.
I hope so too, Ryan. I was just thinking that. I was just feeling that. I think it's going to happen.
Yeah, definitely.
I think it's going to happen. Yeah. Really appreciate you. Love Wonder Junkie. I've been listening in and will continue to. And yeah, let's do this again. Let's do this again soon. And really appreciate knowing you're out there.
Absolutely, brother. I appreciate you very much.
Thanks, Ryan.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for listening to the episode. Be sure to subscribe to the show on Spotify, YouTube, and iTunes, and rate the show. I hope you enjoyed the episode.
What we call reality is in fact nothing more than a culturally sanctioned and linguistically reinforced hallucination.